Hello and welcome back. I want to apologize. We've had another trademark movieboozer.com technical glitch. And with that, we covered Blair Witch. I'm hoping that most of that conversation was saved. We had our wonderful interview with Paul Scanlon. And now we're going to cover some other topics. First of all, Bill Leon. Now, you had something you wanted to talk about recently, and if I'm not mistaken, it's sort of a eulogy.
Pretty much, yeah. It's
Oh, I don't mean to. I don't mean to stop you. Your voice is a little bit glitchy right now.
Ooh, hold on.
So, I know we're just starting this recording, but I want to make sure that we're able to start with as minimal glitches as possible. So, while you're resolving that, I'm going to go ahead and we'll get into that aspect later. There was a recent. Is your sound back?
Does it sound any better? Is it improved at all?
No, it still sounds bad.
Yeah, boy, hold on.
All right, well, that happens sometimes. So, what I will go ahead and do is, in the meantime, I actually do have a eulogy of my own that I will give. It's a recent passing, actually, that just happened today, of a famous filmmaker. This is going to be just a quick discussion. There was a filmmaker who recently passed away named Curtis Hanson, who is best known for films such as The Hand That Rocks the Cradle, L.A. Confidential, Wonder Boys. He also directed 8 Mile, the Eminem movie. And he was also a screenwriter who wrote such stories as The Dunwich Horror, White Dog, and like that. The River Wild is a film of his that I've always considered a really tense adventure story. And it's really unfortunate. He passed away at 71 recently, and his most recent project was Chasing Mavericks, which was a sort of biographical drama that was about the life of the surfer Jay Moriarty. Anyway, I just wanted to highlight that as a filmmaker who passed away after making a series of very compelling films. Now, Bill, are you back? Now we have no sound whatsoever on Bill Leon's side. Oh, boy. Bill Arsenault, for those who are wondering, had to run out. He actually had some additional things he needed to cover on his side. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is just to fill in a little bit of extra time while Bill Leon's sorting out the sound issue on his side, is talk a little bit about a film that I saw today called Hunt for the Wilder People. Bill, are you there?
Can you hear me?
Absolutely, you're back and running.
Thank God, Jesus Christ.
It's all right. It's all right. It's, you know what it is. I'm going to go ahead and, just for the heck of it, I'm going to blame Google and YouTube for whatever, because there have been some changes recently. They recently changed up how Google Hangouts are launched, and I'm just going to say it's not all their fault. Mm-hmm. So I was going to start talking about Hunt for the Wilder People, but I'll get into that in a moment. Why don't you go ahead and go into your...
It was, what was it, Monday? No. What day was it? Sunday?
Sunday night, I believe.
They announced that C. Martin Croker had passed away, and like, he's not a dude that if he was sick, people were going to report on it, or, you know, like, it was super unexpected to just the regular people like me that, you know, don't have that insight into the behind the scenes shit at Adult Swim. And like, it really hit me in a weird way, to where, you know, I all of a sudden was like, because I've talked about Space Ghost before, I've talked about the Brack Show and Cartoon Planet and stuff, and it's not until something like this happens that you're really like, you know what, like, that stuff not only do I love it, like it legitimately has a place close to my heart, and legitimately influenced my sense of humor growing up.
And he absolutely had a lot of interesting credits. I mean, just first of all as an artist, and then second of all as an animator.
Yeah, because he did a lot of that animation in like the early Flash days of Adult Swim.
And third, a voice actor, and that's probably where he's best known.
Yeah.
But Space Ghost Coast to Coast, of course, being sort of the earliest iteration of what would eventually become Adult Swim on Cartoon Network.
It was the first original Cartoon Network show.
Mm-hmm. And it was aimed a little bit more at gaining older audiences. I won't call the show particularly adult-oriented.
Not till the 2000s.
But it did aim to raise the age of people watching the show, because they knew that there was a great deal of people now entering adulthood who grew up watching a lot of the cartoons on Cartoon Network and still tuned in.
And then, of course, you can tell that Space Ghost Coast to Coast was more for adults because they decided to retool those characters for children with the Cartoon Planet series.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a lot more child-friendly. I probably grew up more with that than Space Ghost, but I would catch Space Ghost late when I had the opportunity to stay up late at night or whatever. And when Adult Swim came around especially, that's when I really got into the old Space Ghost episodes. But the Cartoon Planet stuff, I legitimately watched a lot of as a kid. And their music albums, I loved those music albums. I bought both of them. It's so crazy to think that he passed, because, and again, just because it's so unexpected and out of nowhere. And it is one of those things where, like, I didn't realize how much I admired the guy until this, you know?
Absolutely, and he died at a relatively young age, and it was just something that happened, you know, out of the blue. It's really good to know, though, how well he's being remembered, because Adult Swim honored him by re-airing the first Space Ghost Coast to Coast episode on the 19th. And in addition to that, there have been a lot of social media calls from all the different people who, from all over the industry, who have been honoring him. And he's certainly not a household name, so to speak, but as a name within the industry, there's a very significant proportion of people who are always going to remember the contribution he lended to what we now know as adult-oriented television animation. And
it's kind of weird how, like, Adult Swim... I talked about this a lot when I reviewed the last episode of Aqua Teen Hunger Force, but I really felt that there was, like, a real kindred spirit to those original Adult Swim shows, that being Space Ghost, Aqua Teen Hunger Force, Harvey Birdman, Attorney at Law, C-Lab 2021. I think those are, like, the four horsemen of the original Adult Swim era. And I think, like, almost everybody that created those shows originally worked on Space Ghost. Birdman was a constant running joke on Space Ghost, if you remember.
See, I didn't watch as much Space Ghost as you did, so I don't remember a lot of those direct references, and it has been years for me. I certainly would like to catch up on it and rewatch it, because it's the last time I probably watched it to any degree was probably back in the 90s when it was airing.
Between Sunday and today, I've watched a bunch of Space Ghost, Brack Show, Cartoon Planet, and I love that stuff before, you know, so to me it's like...
My understanding is that all the episodes are going back up on Cartoon Network's site for free.
Most of them. There's not every episode, but like they just recently, the day after the announcement was made, put up like a ton of old Space Ghost episodes for free streaming. All of the Brack Show had already been up there, but that's still available. And I can't recommend that stuff enough. Like, it doesn't matter what incarnation it is. Like, those voice actors just played off each other so well and completely reinvented those characters. Because, I mean, like, I can't watch old Space Ghost action cartoons. I don't know about you. Like, they kind of bore the hell out of me now. I caught them a few times in reruns back in the early days of Cartoon Network when they would show like Hanna-Barbera reruns. And I definitely enjoyed it then, but now like it's just crazy to me to think that like they in the early days of Cartoon Network they just used what they had access to, and what they had access to was the Hanna-Barbera library.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't. It's like lightning in a bottle, because like C. Martin Croker was the perfect voice of Zorak. George Lowe was the perfect voice of Space Ghost, you know?
Well, and of course, Gary Owens voiced Space Ghost for a long time, too.
Mm-hmm.
And, it's one of those things where it's just, it's sad to see, another soul such as that depart from the mortal coil, but it's so great to see how many people remember him and how much of an impact he's had.
There were people on my Facebook page, throwing their condolences and looking back, I guess, retrospecting on the situation. Like more people than I would have thought of, like knew him by name, or even just felt the need to say like, hey, I remember that, and that was entertaining to me. I love the fact that something so silly and absurd can kind of leave an impact on you.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's like a lot of the stuff that I like, like I love that kind of stuff. But just to see mainstream culture accept it and mourn over it, that was unexpected for me.
Yeah, and so with that, I can say that there's there's a lot of in the 90s there was a lot of very interesting ideas going on in animation that really, when you chart the influence that they had, it's amazing how much of a change that it made, because a lot of things kind of declined in the 90s. Many would argue that movies became too blockbustery in the 90s and got away from being, from catering more to darker elements, things like that. Like the 80s had a lot of very hardcore action movies and a lot of kids movies where the kids actually spoke like actual human beings. But animation experienced a renaissance during that time frame.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
And it's fascinating to go back into that and look into how that occurred. So with that said, I'd like to move on a little bit, unless you had any closing thoughts.
I would definitely recommend, if you're like even the mildest of interest in it, just check out some of that old stuff, because it holds up. It's still funny, and the chemistry between those voice actors, and I don't know how much of what they did was improvised, but it all feels improvised. Like especially the stuff with Andy Merrill involved, the guy who did Brack. The Brack Show, I'm a big fan of the Brack Show. I love the Brack Show to death. And George Lowe, of course, voiced the dad on the Brack Show. Is this short Latin man who married Brack's alien mother. And he talks like this. He talks like Ricardo Montalban a little bit. Like I straight up adore the Brack Show. I have it all on DVD. I legitimately have of all of them. Like I do love all of them, but I think maybe the Brack Show is the one I have the most affection for.
Well, I'll have to look into that. I don't think
Absolutely, highly recommended, because it's C. Martin Croker did some great work. All those guys that he worked with did great work. Lazo and Crawford, still running Adult Swim to this day. It's so insane for me to think that like this dude that did this silly work really played a huge part in Cartoon Network finding its identity, in Adult Swim being launched, and that finding its identity. Mm-hmm. And it just seemed like this sort of hive mind of creative, funny people.
And speaking of creative and funny people, I'm going to go ahead and transition now into
Taika Waititi.
Taika Waititi. Now, for those of you who aren't familiar with Taika Waititi, he is a New Zealand filmmaker and writer who has kind of made a name for himself in the 2000s up to now for making very interesting low budget comedy films. Most famously, I would say, would be last year, or well, it came out in 2014, but released in the U.S. last year.
Yeah, it didn't get a wide release
Exactly.
in 2015.
What We Do in the Shadows, which was...
He also made Eagle versus Shark. Have you ever watched that?
I have not. That is a movie that I've earmarked on my to-watch list.
I attempted to watch it once, and the first 5 minutes of it were so insufferably, like Napoleon Dynamite without the hint of irony to it.
Well, that's interesting.
I mean, it's a love story, and it definitely has this quirky Napoleon Dynamite feel. Like, look how indie we are. And
actually,
I can't speak on the whole film, and I know this film has a fan base, and I don't want to piss them off. I'm just saying, speaking on the 5 minutes of film that I watched back in 2009, I was not feeling this movie.
I find it interesting you mentioned that Napoleon Dynamite reference because we're talking about this subject, I had the Wikipedia page of Eagle versus Shark pulled up, and it says here, I'm going to just read this. Jim Ridley of The Village Voice noted the dissimilarity to Napoleon Dynamite, saying, Napoleon Dynamite looks like Cary Grant next to the hero of this Kiwi Quirkathon.
Quirkathon, see?
The Village Voice has never been known for their subtlety while reviewing. So, and that's not an insult. That's actually a compliment in a way.
I'm not opposed to actually sitting down and watching the whole film. I'm just recounting that experience I had in 2009 when I attempted to watch it.
And quirk is definitely a style that I would say Taika Waititi has. If What We Do in the Shadows is, for instance,
I still need to see that. I apologize. It's literally just that
that you haven't gotten around to it, despite the fact that I've told you, man, you got to see this.
No, I know that it's not. It has nothing to do with people recommending it to me. It's the fact that I don't want to. I'd like to pay for it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I don't know if you know anyone who. If you have HBO, it was on HBO Go for a long time. But that being said, What We Do in the Shadows is a hilarious mockumentary about a group of vampires living in suburban New Zealand, and the concept is really ridiculous, and it's a very straightforward comedy, though, in that it follows that mockumentary. This is, on the other hand, Hunt for the Wilder People is a comedy that kind of takes a indirect route towards the humor, and it leads to it in a very interesting way. The story is about this little boy named Ricky Baker, played by...
Rick Baker?
Yes, Ricky Baker is his character name.
Okay. Have they confirmed that?
What's that?
What?
Have they confirmed what?
Rick Baker, the special effects artist. Is that an homage?
Could be, for all I know. All I know is his character's name is Ricky Baker, and the actor Julian Dennison is he's kind of he's a teenage kid. Maybe at the time of this movie, I would say he's probably 12 or 13 in age, and Ricky Baker is a boy who has been in and out of various foster homes, and child services have gotten to the point where they're done with him. So they decide they take him to one last foster home and give him basically they tell him, this is your last chance. If this doesn't work, you're going to a group home.
Ugh.
And they deposit him at the rural home of Bella and Heck. Bella, who insists on being called Aunt Bella, is a very charming, delightful, happy, positive lady. And Uncle Heck, who refuses to be called Uncle, he hates that, is played by Sam Neill. And he is a grizzled bearded man who is kind of a man of the woods, very, very countrified in his demeanor. Although it comes, you learn very quickly that that Aunt Bella is also very much in her element out in the woods, in a scene where she brutally attacks and murders a wild boar to cook for dinner. And when I say brutally attacks and murders, I mean she jumps on the thing's back and slits its throat. Which, of course, if you're familiar with boar hunting, that's actually a pretty common way people hunt them. Which to me is disturbing as hell, but So anyway, Ricky is initially he wants to escape. He wants to get the hell out of Dodge. He's a city kid. Clearly, he grew up in kind of an urban environment. But he gradually gets to love his Aunt Bella, and his relationship with Sam Neill as Uncle Heck starts to get a little better, and finally, when he has his birthday, they give him a pit bull who he names Tupac, because of course, and and on that day.
Is this a period piece, or does this take place in modern day?
No, it's modern.
Okay. Tupac just seemed like a weird choice, like it would make more sense if it was the 90s, but at the same time, like Tupac has a big legacy. I'll
this
buy
is
it.
rural New Zealand, so I'm guessing pop culture moves at a slower pace out there.
Not that slow.
Well, hey, if it takes a 26-hour flight to get there, man. Either way, the point being. And this isn't a spoiler because this happens very quickly in the story. Aunt Bella winds up passing away very unexpectedly. And so the boy is left just himself and Uncle Heck, and quickly finds out that the foster network, the child services, are reevaluating and want to bring him back and take him away from the home because she's no longer there. There isn't a woman in the household, and now it's just Ricky Baker and Sam Neill. And what ends up happening is he decides, if they're going to take me away, then I'm going to run away. So he runs off into the woods, and quickly, after a day of running, gets hopelessly lost deep in the woods. Uncle Heck follows him and finally catches up to him and finds him and promptly trips on a rock and breaks his ankle. And being the fact that they're way in the middle of the woods and the boy is hopeless at finding his way around, they have to camp out for a few weeks in order for him to heal. Meanwhile, Child Welfare Services are convinced that Sam Neill has kidnapped the boy. Mm-hmm. And upon Sam Neill, Uncle Heck healing up, they find out that that suddenly they're wanted fugitives, and they believe that he kidnapped the boy, or possibly, and is possibly doing dangerous things with the boy. And suddenly they go on the lam and they decide, rather than give themselves up, they're going to just go off into the woods and try to make it on their own and run from the law, which of course Ricky Baker loves because he's dedicated his life to being kind of a problem child. So this is kind of an
Where's Gilbert Gottfried?
Yes, he gets to be the gangster, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
Now, how this movie presents its humor is very much, I know you mentioned the Napoleon Dynamite aspect. There is definitely a quirk to this, but the writing is very sharp. The humor is there. It's hard to explain the humor. You kind of have to absorb it and get into it. Just the contrast of the characters and how they get into their situations, the strange nuance to how every character interacts with each other. One prominent and hilarious scene is where Rhys Darby, who, for those who are familiar
who does Murray play in this?
That's Rhys Darby. Yep. he plays a character named Psycho Sam.
Reese Darby famously played Murray on Play the Conchords, for those who don't know. I know you were getting at that.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Murray is easily my favorite character on Flight of the Conchords. And in this, what happens is in one sequence in the film, the two, while on the run, encounter this. They see this bush walking around, and they're curious because a bush with arms and legs. What the hell? So suddenly, the bush stands up, and it's Reese Darby with a huge crazy beard, and he tells them. He tells them, "Have you heard the story of this? Don't go out there into the woods, or you'll run into Psycho Sam." And they look at him, and they're like, "No, we haven't heard this." He says, "Well, anyway, my name's Sam. Nice to meet you." And he takes him to his trailer in the middle of the woods, where he's your typical crazy off the grid person who has there's a scene of him cooking something in a bowl that he hasn't taken the fur off of. He just seems to be boiling it. He hands these very creepy, like moldy-looking cookies to them, and which they quickly take away and hide because it's like, we're not eating these.
Do you remember back in the day when we used to say hermit, and like we don't say hermit anymore because doomsday preppers and like you said, off the grid people, like that's a thing now, so we don't really say hermit anymore.
Well, it's all euphemism for crazy people. Let's be honest.
Yeah.
And so, how this is a movie that is I was not expecting to laugh as much as I did, but it's a movie that also, despite it being a very funny movie, it also has a genuine heart to it. And Sam Neill is at his best in this role as Uncle Heck, who is a man of the woods. He's a man of the wilderness, but he's also got some frailties. For instance, he can't read. He's illiterate. Mm-hmm. And it's an interesting character trait in that you get a feeling that he's never got around to reading because to him that was never an important thing.
That makes sense. You reminded me of the remake of Annie that came out a few years ago, and she's been going to public school for 12 to 13 years but never learned to read, and I'm like, I call bullshit. This case makes sense. That's what I'm getting at.
Right.
Because like really modern day filmmaking, unless you're doing something set in the past, like you can't really get away with that.
Well, I mean, illiteracy is still major. It is an issue that's out there, and the fact is, some schools do leave people behind to an extent, and it is unfortunate. But in this case, yes, they give a legitimate explanation for how he could be illiterate at this point, despite being an intelligent person in many ways. He just happens to not be quite he doesn't have the book smarts, but he has a feel for the wilderness. Mm-hmm. And I've always been a big fan of Sam Neill, and many people think Sam Neill's British or Australian. They forget that, yes, there is indeed New Zealand actors out there. Mm-hmm. It's easier for people to believe nowadays, now that the New Zealand film industry has really boomed. And yes, this movie, like all films involving New Zealand, has a Lord of the Rings reference in it somewhere. Mm-hmm. But that's just because...
for the record, I didn't know any of this was a thing until I watched Flight of the Conchords. So I don't think he worked on that show, Taika Waititi, but he's obviously friends with the core people.
Oh, yeah. And I think he directed an episode of Flight of the Conchords, something like that. Mm-hmm. Actually, yes, it says here. Oh, he directed 2. He directed my favorite episode, New Zealand Town.
Which one is that? Oh, that's a good one. Yeah, that's fun.
He also directed the Drive-By episode. What was that one? That's where. Oh, that's the one with Aziz Ansari in it.
Ah, that has the pop an apple in his ass. Yeah, what's that song called? I forget. Anyway, it's been a long time since I've watched Flight of the Conchords.
That's the episode with the songs Mother Uckas.
Mother Uckas.
To my Mother Uckas. Dragon.
I can move my shit.
String Red.
Yeah, that's great stuff.
Yeah. So, long story short, I don't want to go too much into it because I don't want to spoil anything. I will say though that I'm looking very much forward to Taika Waititi's next project. He was one of the there were a few writers on it, but he was one of the co-writers of the upcoming Disney animated film
Moana, I think it's called.
Moana, whatever. And which I think makes a lot of sense because Taika Waititi is his upbringing. He's of Maori descent, and Maori descent is that's sort of within the same Pacific Island kind of tradition as the Hawaiians. So there's I think an ingrained kind of I think understanding for that for that culture that I think would make him a very suitable writer. Plus, this quirky sense of humor.
I'm interested because the guy that did Hamilton, Lin-Manuel Miranda, is working on that film as well. Mm-hmm. Plus, you got The Rock. Honestly, I really felt lukewarm about Moana until I started hearing about who was working on it. Because, like, so far, this movie has gotten two reactions out of people. One is that it looks gorgeous, and the other is that we're stereotyping Hawaiian people.
Oh, well, here's the thing. Admittedly, anytime you do start dealing with a film set in another culture, you're going to look into the possibility of stereotyping. And I think that that's an easy phrase to throw around. Until we see the movie, we won't know for sure if it plays right. If it's got a compelling story, I think then that will be more than enough to carry it. Now, I will say Taika Waititi also is going to be the director, although he's not the writer. He's going to be the director of Thor Ragnarok, the next Marvel film in the Thor franchise. And so that's an interesting aspect, because the Thor films have always been, I think, a little bit heavier on the comedic elements than the other films within the Marvel series. And so it actually quite intrigues me that is the direction they're going in. Now, not being a director, rather a writer on the film, he still has the ability to ingrain a sense of humor into it. It's worth noting that as a filmmaker, he's also a very visual guy. Hunt for the Wilder People, despite being such a low-budget movie, is a deeply visual film. It takes full advantage of the gorgeous vistas of rural New Zealand. Of course, I mentioned Lord of the Rings. A lot of those same landscapes can be retooled in many... it's sort of... I would almost call it a modern-day equivalent of John Ford's West. Whereas the Old West of John Ford's films, and a lot of other imitators, had that Monument Valley backdrop, so many films from New Zealand take advantage of the settings of the mountains and the high plains and the ocean view setting as well. Kind of the jungle aspects. It's a really compelling thing. So with that, I want to say that now that Wilder People is, it looks like the Leon has fallen off. Let me see. All right. I'm going to try to send another invite to him because it appears that we have gotten another technical difficulty. Aha, and he is back. Apologies for that delay.
Got back.
So I'm not certain what caused that, but I just wrapped up talking about Wilder People by saying that Thor Ragnarok is actually a film that Taika is going to be directing next.
Oh yeah, that's like filming right now, or done filming, really,
right.
Isn't it?
Now he didn't write it, but he did direct it, and he definitely has the ability to ingrain some humor into the film one way or another as a filmmaker. But another thing that's worth noting is he's a very visual filmmaker. And
this movie's going to have Mark Ruffalo playing the Hulk in it, which apparently is very tricky for Marvel to do legally. But I'm glad that they're finally putting him in movies that aren't the Avengers movies. You know, like we need to see more of Hulk in these.
Absolutely, I agree. And I think it's interesting, though, that they chose a filmmaker like Taika to do it. And I think it's good because it's going to help him. And knowing him, he's going to continue to make these wonderfully intelligent, smaller films at the same time.
Right.
And I want that to be encouraged. And the visual aspect, if you are... I said this a few minutes ago when you were off, but I'll bring it up again, that... Hunt for the Wilder People is a visual feast. It really captures the beauty of rural New Zealand, and you see a lot of those same Lord of the Rings style landscapes retooled in this film in a beautiful way. And I was explaining how it's sort of reminiscent of the John Ford West, how so many films from John Ford Westerns and a lot of its imitators would show Monument Valley and would repeat a lot of those same vistas, but in different ways. And it's sort of become that way with New Zealand film, which is kind of interesting. Because New Zealand isn't a huge country, but there's a lot of beautiful areas to shoot. So now that I've covered that, I also want to go into, and I think this will be a good thing to close out our episode with, is a discussion of the latest documentary that is posted to Hulu. It's a direct-to-Hulu film directed by Ron Howard called The Beatles, 8 Days a Week, The Touring Years. It's a film that is basically, it's a very specific focus on the Beatles during the time period with which they rose to fame and through to just before the Sgt. Pepper album came out, when they closed out by playing at the Candlestick Park concert, which was one of their last shows. I believe that was their final show, not counting the show they played on the roof.
Ooh, all right, so this is a complete aside, but it's a me and Ken thing for those listening. Mike Love was at the premiere of this movie.
How did I fucking know you were going to bring up Mike Love?
Mike Love was at the premiere of this movie.
All right. So tell us all about that.
This is definitely like Kiss and Tell material, and maybe it'll become a thing on Kiss and Tell when we get around to picking that back up. But really, this whole Beatles review will be like some Kiss and Tell type shit. But Mike Love was at the premiere with Ringo and Paul. I haven't seen any video footage of it or anything. I've just seen a photo of it, and I'm just like, why was he there? Like, that's really what I want to know. Like, did Ron Howard invite him? Are they what's going on here? Did he crash it? Was he even invited?
He could have been invited. I don't know. I mean, he is Mike Love after all.
He's a Trump supporter.
Well, okay. I mean, here's the thing. I've never been much of a Beach Boys fan. I mean, I enjoy some stuff. I'm not saying I hate them. I've just never been, what I would call a huge Beach Boys fan. I consider a lot of their stuff kind of, and here's the thing, it kind of comes down to, in a way, the Mike Love stuff, because the Mike Love stuff is very repetitive. It's very much about a handful of very specific topics.
He's an idiot.
Girls and beaches and
awesome school. Be true to your school, bro. He was a bro. He was a bro back in the 60s. Like,
so the Beatles, which last I checked were not the Beach Boys. They were the other fab group, except that
I mean, they both. That's a discussion for a different day. Let's talk about what's the subtitle of the movie?
The Beatles, 8 Days a Week, The Touring Years.
Okay. You didn't need 8 days a week in there. You could have just called this The Beatles Touring Years, but...
It could have just been called... I think actually 8 Days a Week is specifically the name of the Touring Years as the subtitle. But here's the thing. It's a very tight documentary that, deals with the kind of the stresses that they experienced under Beatlemania and how that made touring just such a drag for them, because the big problem they had was in their early years, that was sort of their golden days of hearing the Beatles play live, because you could actually hear them. And that's infamously when the Beatles recorded live at the Hollywood Bowl, which was it was meant to be a cash-in live album. The studios themselves deemed it unreleasable because you couldn't hear the Beatles very well over the screams, despite the fact that they used, the best quality recording equipment they had at the time to do it. It took until the 70s for technology to develop where they ended up giving George Martin the ability to try to mix out the audience enough for it to be releasable. And
is this all tackled in the movie?
The movie talks about the live at Hollywood.
The album I'm referring to.
But they don't talk about the album to much of an extent. They more talk about just the screams and how it was really the girls weren't going there to really listen to music. They were going there to become part of this experience of seeing the Beatles, and
it's like a cult.
Not just a cult, but almost like a. We've talked about in our conversation about the film Listomania how the term Beatlemania was actually adapted from it, where it was almost like these girls hadn't experienced or they were experiencing a pubescent awakening, a sexual awakening for the first time in their lives, and somehow it was channeled into the pop culture of obsession around this specific band.
It brought itself out in the way of screaming at the top of your lungs, but like literally what you just described, you could apply to Elvis Presley, and arguably, I don't think his concerts were ever like notoriously problematic for that reason.
Well, you could, and he did garner that kind of obsession to an extent, but the Beatles are the only band to have had. I think they had the fortune of coming out at a time where television was so propagated, and everyone was tuned into this one specific show, the Ed Sullivan Show, for instance, where culture was like focused like a diamond drill on one very specific area, and everyone knew the Beatles. Even people who didn't care about the Beatles had heard the Beatles because they couldn't escape it. Nowadays, this sort of thing is probably impossible to happen again because there's so many subcultures. The concept of a subculture was almost unknown back then. There was a culture, and then there was everything else. I mean, that was it. I mean, of course, you had a few very culty groups, but we're talking like inner city, like bodegas and places like the Greenwich Village types, that sort of thing. Which that was not by any means spread out amongst the world yet. And it's just fascinating how this film covers that. Now, one criticism I will have of this film is it borrows a great deal of the footage from the Beatles anthology documentary series, which basically means that I've seen probably a third of this movie already. Now, that's not a criticism because the anthology came out in the early 90s, and those who haven't seen it, and like me, I own it, and I've rewatched it 3 or 4 times, more than that. I've actually rewatched it probably 10 times. I love it. But but the fact is that if you are an obsessive Beatle fan, you've probably seen a lot of this already. If you, I would almost recommend if you really are a big music fan to watch the anthology instead, because it covers a lot of this same stuff. But as a 97-minute encapsulation of their touring period, this is a really good introduction to what it was, what Beatlemania was, what it meant to them. You get a lot of really interesting interviews with with Paul McCartney and Ringo Starr and John Lennon and George Harrison in archival interviews. That's actually where a lot of it came from, the anthology, because the anthology used basically all the archival stuff they could of John Lennon. But yeah, the McCartney and the Ringo interviews, though, are mostly contemporary, and you never see them, though, which is interesting. I think they chose to be audio only, and that actually helps to an extent, because it makes you focus on the older footage. One thing I did like about this documentary that the anthology didn't do is you get to see a lot of color film of the Beatles from that period, and a lot of color film, because color was not exactly an easy thing to do back then, but seeing them in color from that time really humanizes it in a way that you may not have expected before, because there's a lot of things. Black and white is a very cinematic thing, but it's not a very personal thing. It creates a divide between reality and what you're seeing. I really enjoyed the documentary, and I think those who are interested, it is streaming on Hulu for free, so it's definitely, or rather, for subscribers to Hulu, it's worth watching.
I need to see it. I just don't have Hulu access at the moment, but it's on my to-do list. I haven't seen the anthology stuff. I just haven't had access to it, you know. But
the anthology. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. What were you saying?
The anthology stuff is really worth watching because it's an 8-episode long. Each episode is give or take an hour, sometimes a little more, sometimes a little less, and it really is. Now, the thing to remember about the anthology, and actually 8 Days a Week has the same fault, in that it's very much the Beatles telling their own story, so you get their perspective on history, which is one very important view, but there's a lot of things that you don't hear from about their story, because it's not the story they want to tell you. The biggest fault of the anthology is it basically glosses over the White Album recording in a segment that takes about 10 minutes. They could have spent an entire episode on how that kind of was the beginning of their divide as a group.
Right.
But they don't really, and I think they don't because it's probably too painful of an experience for them to have relived. They get into it a little bit later on, talking about the recordings during the back sessions, but
that's weird, really, because like Let It Be is just a film full of that, you know.
And they address it then, and they do address the divide pretty well in the anthology series. It's done from a perspective where no one is outwardly trying to hurt each other. And I'm not saying that they should, but you can tell that they're being diplomatic.
I think, and this is just a good example to kind of just talk about Beatles stuff. The first time I watched Let It Be was with my friend, and there's a scene in the movie where George Harrison is saying to, I believe, Paul McCartney, he's just like, tell me what you want me to play. I'll play it however you want me to play it. Just get to the fucking point.
Well, yeah, what he really says, he puts it in a much more polite way. He says, tell me how to play it and I'll play it, or I won't play it if you don't want me to. And he's just like, I'll do whatever you want. Just tell me to do something, Cubby, you know?
Yeah, and me and my friend were basically like Chris Tucker and Ice Cube and Friday. We were both like, damn! And like, oh god, yeah, that movie is awkward at times.
It is, and actually, the climax of 8 Days a Week is you get to watch their performance on top of the
Apple Studios roof. Exactly,
and it's nice to see, but it cuts out all that context of what created that. Which that's why Let It Be is such a fascinating film, because you get to see how they were at the end of the rope, and all of these big, great ideas they had for let's rehearse this live, and then we'll record our entire album live on stage. We'll do it. Maybe we could do it on a riverboat or something like that.
That's
all of
Brian
these
Wilson shit.
Yeah, all of these brilliant ideas climax to, we just need a way to end this film. Fuck it, want to go on the roof?
Yeah, which worked a lot. Yeah,
and it's a really good climax to the story, and it's fascinating. But the anthology series fills in some gaps there that I love, because you have Paul McCartney saying, "We were actually really hoping to get arrested and dragged off by the police." And
they didn't get arrested, but the cops do show up.
And the cops show up
20 minutes in.
Mm-hmm. They show up and they politely ask them to stop. And that really...
Listen, we don't have any guns, and you don't have any guns. Let's find a fucking understanding here.
Right. And it's kind of sad, though, because Ringo and Paul in the anthology talk about that, and they say, we were really hoping that this would be a thing, that that the police would just, enough of you Beatles, and take them away in a dramatic ending. I almost wish that they had staged, even if it came out years later that it had been fake, if they had staged the police raiding the Apple Studios concert and pulling him away, that would have been a really cool way to finish off the story. But either way, it's, I think, Let It Be is an interesting film. I think the hardest thing about watching it is you are literally watching a group of people who were once close friends, and you can tell that they're to the point where they're kind of sick of each other for the moment. And it's that uncomfortable feeling of, have you ever gone on a trip with a group of friends and there's a couple of them that just don't get along very well?
Yes.
That is never a comfortable feeling, to have to be into that situation. And it really kind of throws off the fun of the rest of the adventure that you're on. Mm-hmm. But 8 Days a Week is a documentary that's worth tracking down. I highly recommend it. So with that said, we've reached the end of this podcast episode, except I do want to quickly go over what we have in store for next week's episode. The
Magnificent Seven releases this weekend?
Yep, The Magnificent Seven, and I have to watch and review Storks.
Oh, yeah, well, you're super bummed. It's Warner Brothers Animation, right?
Yeah, well...
Here's the thing about this, which is that before the Lego Movie, the last Warner Brothers Animation film was the fucking Looney Tunes Back in Action, which has one really awesome scene in it, but other than that, I understand why that was. Yeah. I'm just saying, Lego Movie was really good, so with this, I really doubt this is going to be, hopefully, I'm hoping this surprises you,
It is directed by Stoller and Sweetland. Nicholas Stoller and Doug Sweetland.
Nick Stoller, fucking forgetting Sarah Marshall.
Yeah, so that's something. Doug Sweetland, if you don't know, he was an animator, a Pixar animator. He worked on everything going back to Toy Story.
Okay, no, I didn't know that. But so I'm mildly interested in this. Mm-hmm. I'm not. You've talked to me about this very cynically the past few days.
Yeah, I think it's just the premise and the trailers have not been very kind to it.
I've seen them at work a few times, and some of those times have been in Spanish because we usually don't watch English-speaking television at work.
It's also one of those movies where they love to advertise the huge celebrity cast. We have Andy Samberg.
That's I think DreamWorks started that. Really. Have you ever watched Shark Tale?
No.
Oh, we got a commentary Shark Tale sometime because that would be a lot of fun.
May as well do whatever that surfing penguin movie was.
No.
Surf Suck, wasn't that what it was called?
No, you don't know, man. Coming soon, Shark Tale commentary. We got to do this.
I don't know about that.
I'm telling you. The surfing penguin movie is not as bad as Sharkdo.
Commenting on it would require me to watch it twice. Once to watch it and once to comment. I'm not doing that.
Well, not well. You know.
I'll say this, Bill. You'll have to. This is going to be a campaign. You're going to have to convince me over the next few months that this is worth doing.
Oh, it's the worst. It's absolutely the worst. Like,
all right. Well, that's going to take some help. So anyway, Storks.
We'll get back to you on Storks.
We'll see.
What else comes out over the weekend?
Actually, those are the only two major releases this weekend.
Magnificent Seven. I'm gonna try to go see that in the theater because I think at the very least it's a September film, so I don't know how.
Have you seen The Magnificent Seven?
No.
Have you seen? Well, hell, if you haven't seen that one, you probably haven't seen Kurosawa's The Seven Samurai either, right?
No, I should watch both of those movies. I haven't.
Knowing you, you'll probably want to see The Magnificent Seven. Is the crowd pleaser movie. Seven Samurai is, I think, a wonderful movie and arguably the better film overall. But it's also it has the Kurosawa had a pacing that I don't think would sit as well with you. So I would recommend.
If I'm in the mood to watch something slower paced, I can get into it.
I would recommend you watch both, but you don't have to watch it in any particular order. Mm-hmm. I will say this though: you could also watch Battle Beyond the Stars because that was also The Magnificent Seven in space, directed by Roger. Well, not directed by, but produced by Roger Corman.
That's a good triple feature.
Yeah, and Robert Vaughn plays the same character in both The Magnificent Seven and in Battle Beyond the Stars. Not the same character, but the same the same character, the same basic person.
Right.
Which is kind of hilarious. But anyway, long story short, we'll see you next week. We're going to watch ourselves some westerns and some movies about storks and babies.
I might watch What We Do in the Shadows, so I'll get back to you next week on that.
I highly recommend that. And Hunt for the Wilder People is available for streaming, so give that a view as well.
Rest in peace, C. Martin Croker.